Hi, this is Dr. Rick Janelle, and I'm doing this as a test to see how teaching by video works in the age of the coronavirus. We've been asked by our government to not gather in large groups of people, and there's got to be some other ways we can share God's Word and still fellowship with one another. And so I wanted to test this. You can tell me what you think about it. But I wanted to share some thoughts with you from the life of Joshua. And to begin with, I want to remind you what the book of James, chapter 4, 13 through 15 says. James says, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that." A couple of weeks can make a huge difference. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about plans, about things we wanted to do, things we wanted to accomplish. And suddenly we find ourselves in a brand new world. And I just want to give you some encouraging words. But remember, we need to trust God. The old joke says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I know many of you are not living your plans today. Some of you are dealing with children that are being homeschooled when you didn't plan to homeschool them. Some of you are going to work when you wish you could stay home, and others of you are being asked to stay home when you wish you could go to work. It is kind of a scary time in that if this spreads out as far as it could or lasts as long as it could, we could be dealing with what we may one day call the new normal, with social distancing and the changes of the way people do work and interacting with other people. And I just want to remind you that in history, things have changed before. And it could be that this is the beginning of the end of time, or it could just be that this is another one of those times that Jesus reminded us of when he says, terrible times, with an S, will come. He says there'll always be wars and rumors of wars and different things happen. And so it could very well be that this is just another twist and turn in the history of time. Maybe it is one of those once in 100-year things where, every 100 years something huge happens and changes the course of history. Maybe this is what this is. We don't know. And that's kind of the point that James makes is we don't know. We should be people of prayer. We should be people that trust in God. And I want to remind you of a time back in the days of Joshua when there was a change in the people's lives. And so let's look at the book of Joshua together. Notice how that in chapter 3 of the book of Joshua, the children of Israel are getting ready to stop their 40 years of wandering in the desert. They're getting ready to move into the promised land that God had promised their ancestors, but because of the lack of faith and because of the lack of obedience, their ancestors were not allowed to go into the promised land. And so there's a new generation. All they've ever known was living in the desert, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. All of them had always lived in the desert. All of them had eaten manna all their life. All of them had quail provided by God. And now they are going into a new land that God described as a land that glows with milk and honey. And yet it's different. Notice what it says in chapter 3, verse 3. "When you see the ark of the covenant, the Lord your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before." We're sitting in times today, we're living in times today when we've not been this way before. We don't know what's going to happen. So do you think it'd be good for us to look back and see the instructions that God gave to the leader of these people who was going to take them into a new place with new problems and into a direction they've never been before? I think it would be very encouraging to see just what God thought was important for the leader of this group of people. And so let's look back at chapter 1 together. Notice how I've highlighted some words in these verses. We're going to look first at chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. After the death of Moses, the servant of God, the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, who was Moses' aide, "Moses, my servant, is dead. But then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place that you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. And notice the promise that he gives him. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Do you think maybe Joshua at this point in time was feeling a little scared, a little forsaken? The man who he had followed and been in an internship under for years, Moses, was now dead and gone. And the mantle of leadership was being put onto his back. And maybe he was feeling a great sense of stress, a great sense of fear and worry, because they were going to a new place and he didn't have his mentor to lead him. And he was now expected to be the one to lead all these other people. You too today may be finding your place to be a place of stress, a place of worry, a place of fear. So remember what God said to Moses, I will never leave you or forsake you. And if you look at the yellow places in these passages, he says that 3 times in the 18 verses. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Look down at verse 9. The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Look down at verse 17. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. There's something about being with God and in God's presence that eases our fears and changes our minds and our hearts. And I don't know how you can get through stressful times without having some kind of a personal relationship with his people, with God, something to lean on that's bigger and greater than you. You don't want to face these kind of problems alone. You want to face them with God, with Jesus, and with a group of his people and community with them as well. So let's read a little bit further from chapter 1. He says, of course, starting in verse 6, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Look at verse 7. Be strong and very courageous. Look down at verse 9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Look down at verse 18. Only be strong and courageous. Do you get the idea that there's 2 things God is trying to impress on Joshua? One is that we need to have a relationship with God. We need to be close to God. And we need to be people who are not stopped by fear. We need to be courageous. We need to be bold. The New Testament tells us that the Spirit of God does not bring timidity, but is a spirit of power and good judgment and sound mind. Listen, this is not a time to be afraid. When you see the world changing, when you live in a world where there are things that are not going the way they've always gone, where your plans have made God laugh, don't be afraid unless you don't have a relationship with God, or unless you're estranged from his people and don't have a relationship with his people. Because you see, those 2 things go hand in hand with what other things that God promised him. Look at the purple notes in this passage. Verse 7, that you may be successful wherever you go. Then you will be prosperous and successful. See, being prosperous and successful, being successful wherever you go, does not mean that you have to stay where you've always been. It's not required that things never change or that plans don't get disrupted for you to be successful. Success comes from a relationship with God and a relationship with his people, and from living forward from that set of roots without fear, without being discouraged. We need to be people who are full of courage. You know, in today's world, we who are Christians have a great opportunity to let our lights shine. We have the opportunity to be salt and light in ways that in our lifetime we've never seen before. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? One of the reasons, although there are others, but one of the reasons is he wants to use his children to show those who are outside of his family how godly people respond to troubles and difficulties. You see, everyone you know is facing the same problem, whether it's being sheltered at home or having to go to work when you wish you were at home, going to the store and finding an empty shelf where there's something that you wanted to have. Listen, these tough times are better with Jesus. They're better with God. You need a relationship with God. You need a relationship with his people. And because of those 2 things, you can be prosperous in the middle of all these times that other people are scared and discouraged by. So don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. The Bible promises that God will take care of us. Jesus says, why do you worry? You can't change a hair on your head. God knows the number of the very sparrows, and if one falls, he knows. And Jesus asked the question that's very important. He says, aren't you of more importance than one of them? And the answer to that is, yes, you are. Jesus didn't die for the sparrows of the sky. He didn't die for the rabbits in the field. He died for you. And God wanted you so badly and valued you so highly that he was willing to see his son go to the cross so that he could have a relationship with you. And so let me remind you today, be strong, be courageous, be the person that God wants you to be. Be a good example where you live. Check on the people that are around you. Be sure and check especially on the older people. And don't be afraid of a virus. If you get sick, you get sick. If you die, you get a pay raise and you get to move into a mansion. If you live, then you get to live. We as Christians, of all people on the earth, have most to be thankful for, have the most to be blessed for. In fact, we are very, very blessed. And so if you're a child of God, don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Take the words that God sent to Joshua at heart, especially when you consider that we are, as a country, going into a place, into a time of history that we've not been before. So I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can't tell you what's going to happen with our government. I can't tell you what's going to happen with our finances, with our economy. I can't tell you what's going to happen with your job or my job or how the church is going to look moving forward. But I can tell you this. You want to face it with God. You want to face it with a relationship with Jesus. You want to have a relationship with other godly people. However you need to do that, reach out by cell phone. If you feel prompted by God and if your conscience brings up a name or a face in your head, pick up your phone and give them a call. Just say hi. Ask them how they're doing. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out conversation. And if you run out of things to say, disconnect the phone call and go on about your life. But we need to be the people of God. We need to let our light shine. We need to be people who are salt and light. We need to be a city set on a hill. You can do your part if you won't give in to fear and if you won't give in to discouragement. So this is Dr. Rick Janelle. Thank you for listening. And please, please, please be people of prayer and of thoughtful living, but not of fear.